Danica, a poised and disciplined female soldier, had just completed a long, challenging deployment. The weariness of battlefields and the weight of her duty were still fresh, but she was heading home. The one thing she yearned for was peace, a quiet flight to unwind and finally feel the comfort of her father's welcoming arms. As a surprise, her father had gifted her a first-class ticket, a gesture of love and recognition after her months of service. The ticket was a symbol of his pride, a way of telling her she deserved a moment of luxury and rest. Danica stepped onto the plane with a quiet dignity, clad in her crisp military uniform. She was not seeking attention, nor was she looking for admiration. Her sole focus was to take her seat and breathe easy for the first time in a while. She walked down the aisle, her boots softly tapping against the cabin floor, her movements calm and composed, a soldier at rest. She found her seat, 3A, a window seat in first class, and settled in, folding her uniform jacket and placing her backpack beneath the seat. Her heart longed for peace and the comfort of her father's gift. But peace was elusive. As Danica settled in, Karen, a flight attendant, approached her with a stern expression. She glanced at Danica's uniform, checked the boarding pass, and then, with a chillingly authoritative tone, asked, "May I see your boarding pass?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Danica handed over her pass, still unaware of the storm that was about to unfold. The flight attendant glanced at the ticket and then at Danica, her eyes narrowing. "This is a first-class seat," Karen said, with an air of condescension. "I believe there's been a mix-up. I'm going to need you to move to the back. This section is reserved for premium customers." Danica blinked, her mind struggling to comprehend the words. What was happening? Danica stared at the flight attendant, her heart racing as a wave of disbelief washed over her. She had heard the words clearly, yet they didn't make sense. First class? Reserved for premium customers? She wasn't some imposter trying to sneak into a seat she hadn't paid for. She was a soldier, a daughter, a woman who had given everything for her country. And yet, here she was, being told that her place, her rightful seat, wasn't hers at all. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The hum of the airplane, the chatter of passengers, the clink of trays, all of it faded into the background. All Danica could hear was the voice of Karen, the flight attendant, as it echoed in her ears. "I need you to move. This section is for premium customers." The insult hit like a slap, not because of the words, but because of the underlying assumption. The assumption that Danica, in her uniform, didn't belong in the luxury of first class, that she was out of place. It wasn't the seat that hurt. It was the judgment, the unspoken belief that a soldier like her didn't deserve comfort or respect. She had served in the most dangerous places, facing down challenges most could never imagine. But here, at 30,000 feet, she was nothing more than a second-class citizen in the eyes of a flight attendant who hadn't bothered to check the truth. Her hands clenched into fists, but her voice remained calm. "I'll move," she said, her voice betraying none of the turmoil inside. There was no point in arguing. She had learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting. Not here. Not in this moment. With a quiet dignity, Danica stood, gathering her belongings without a word. The eyes of nearby passengers, the ones who had been polite, the ones who had looked at her with faint curiosity moments ago, now shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke. No one defended her. In fact, most of them looked away, unwilling to get involved in the quiet drama unfolding before them. The absence of support was as suffocating as the flight itself. Danica slowly made her way to the back of the plane, the tight space of economy class feeling even smaller than it was. She found an empty seat, crammed between strangers, the discomfort in the seat itself nothing compared to the sting of the experience. As she settled in, she fought the trembling in her hands, the frustration building in her chest. Once she was seated, she pulled out her phone, her fingers moving automatically. She didn't need to say much. Just a few words were enough. She made me move to economy, said I didn't belong in first class. I didn't argue, but she touched my arm. I'm okay, just upset. With a deep breath, she pressed send. The message was brief, but it carried everything. Her confusion, her hurt, her calm. And as always, her father would understand. Marcus Hayes had been her anchor in life, the man who had taught her the importance of standing tall in the face of adversity. He was a senior officer, a man who had seen more than his share of battles, but nothing had prepared him for this. Within minutes, the phone buzzed with a reply. It was short, succinct, and firm. Give me the flight number. Danica didn't hesitate. She sent the number immediately, knowing what would come next. She had no doubt her father would make this right. It was in his nature to protect what was his, and she was his. But what she didn't expect was the chain of events that would unfold next. Meanwhile, as Karen continued her duties, oblivious to the storm she had ignited, Danica's father was already on the phone. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. This was not the kind of situation where polite conversation would do. Get me the airline's management, Marcus said, his voice calm but filled with an intensity that could cut through steel. Now. Moments later, he was speaking with the airline's customer service manager, a man who had no idea who he was dealing with. Marcus didn't introduce himself with titles or pleasantries. He didn't need to. The weight of his words alone would carry more authority than any rank or position. Listen carefully. Marcus began, his voice steady, betraying none of the anger he was holding in check. My daughter is on your flight. She's a soldier, and she's been humiliated by one of your attendants. I want this situation resolved immediately. I need to speak to someone in charge. The customer service manager, now understanding that this wasn't just an ordinary complaint, stammered nervously. He promised to look into it, but Marcus wasn't interested in promises. Not when his daughter had been treated with such blatant disrespect. Your flight attendant physically touched my daughter and told her she didn't belong in first class. You will apologize to her and you will make it right. This incident will not be swept under the rug. Not by me. The manager's voice faltered as he assured Marcus that he would escalate the situation. But Marcus had no patience for escalation. He had already made it clear that this would not be a quiet matter. You're going to land the plane early, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the manager's attempts at placating him. And you'll have your flight attendant face my daughter and apologize. You'll make her publicly acknowledge her mistake. And if you think this is going away, think again. This is a federal issue now. As the plane sailed through the skies, Danica's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from her father. They know. It's being handled. For the first time in hours, Danica felt a small sense of relief. But she wasn't naive. She knew there was more to this than a simple apology. This wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was about standing up for what was right, about ensuring that no one else would ever be made to feel like she had. Karen was finishing up her service in the galley when the call came in. She wiped her hands on her apron and turned to the phone, still oblivious to the gravity of the situation she had unwittingly caused. "Karen." The voice on the other end was stern, professional. "I need you to go back to seat 3A. You've made a serious mistake, and it needs to be corrected immediately." She blinked in confusion, glancing at her colleagues as they moved about, their attention elsewhere. "I'm not sure what you mean," she replied, her tone casual, assuming it was just another typical customer complaint. "Listen carefully," the voice continued, colder now. "The passenger you moved to economy is not just another traveler. She's the daughter of Marcus Hayes, a senior military officer. He's made it clear that this will not be tolerated. You will go to her, apologize publicly, and escort her back to her seat in first class. This is being handled at the highest level." The words hit Karen like a slap, her heart skipping a beat. Marcus Hayes? The name rang a bell. The high-ranking military officer who had made headlines in recent months. She had no idea she had made such a colossal error. She was silent for a moment, the realization settling in. She had thought nothing of the soldier sitting in first class. She had assumed, like so many others, that uniformed personnel weren't entitled to luxury, that they didn't deserve the same privileges as others. How wrong she had been. Her hands trembled as she placed the phone back into its holder, the weight of her mistake suddenly crushing her. She had humiliated a soldier. Worse, she had no idea who that soldier was. As she made her way down the narrow aisles of the plane, her stomach twisted into knots. The thought of confronting the woman, Danica as she had been called earlier, made her heart race. What could she possibly say? How could she explain herself when she knew deep down that her actions had been based on a snap judgment that had now come back to haunt her? When Karen reached the row where Danica was seated, she was almost afraid to look up. She had seen the soldier's face earlier, but now, sitting in the cramped economy class, the woman looked different. She didn't look like the kind of person who would quietly accept mistreatment. There was a strength in her eyes, a quiet determination that Karen hadn't noticed before. Danica was looking out the window, her posture stiff, her hands folded in her lap. She was still holding her phone, though Karen couldn't see the screen. "Excuse me," Karen started, her voice tentative, almost too soft. "Danica?" Danica turned slowly, her gaze meeting Karen's with a cool, composed stare. There was no hint of anger in her eyes, but Karen could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "I'm sorry," Karen said quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know who you were. I made a mistake. Please, let me escort you back to your seat in first class. I'll make sure this doesn't happen again." The words felt hollow as they left her mouth, but they were the only ones she could offer. Karen waited for a response, her hands wringing together in front of her. She wasn't sure what she had expected, perhaps a harsh rebuke or a look of contempt. But Danica's response took her completely by surprise. Danica stood up slowly, meeting Karen's eyes with a steady, unwavering gaze. There was a long pause before she spoke, her voice calm, yet laced with an undeniable weight. "You don't need to apologize to me," Danica said, her tone firm but not cruel. "You owe that apology to the people who you've made feel inferior. I'm not the one who needs your apology. You should be apologizing to every soldier, every person who's been dismissed like I was. I'm just one example. This isn't just about me." Karen felt her face flush, the weight of Danica's words landing with a heavy thud. She had assumed her mistake was a one-time occurrence, an unfortunate incident that would be forgotten. But Danica was right. This wasn't just about one passenger being wronged. It was about the systemic ways in which people were judged based on assumptions. And those assumptions had hurt people like Danica, people who served their country, people who deserved respect. Danica's gaze softened slightly as she continued. "But yes, I'll accept your apology. You were wrong and you know it. Let's just move on." Karen nodded quickly, her eyes welling up with a mixture of guilt and gratitude. She was ashamed of herself, ashamed that she had made such a callous mistake, but also grateful for the opportunity to make it right, even if only in a small way. Thank you, Karen said, her voice shaky. Thank you for being so understanding. Without another word, she gestured for Danica to follow her. The flight attendant led her back toward the front of the plane, and as they walked, Karen couldn't help but feel the eyes of the other passengers on them. She could feel their judgment, their curiosity about the situation unfolding between the two women. But it didn't matter. When they reached Danica's original seat, Karen hesitated before speaking again. Would you like anything? She asked. Water? Something to eat? Anything at all? Danica settled back into her seat, her posture relaxing just slightly as she adjusted the seatbelt. She looked up at Karen and shook her head. I'm fine, she replied simply as Karen walked away. Her heart was still heavy with the weight of her actions, but there was a small sense of relief. She had done what was asked of her, and she had apologized. Maybe that would be enough to start making things right, even if only one small step at a time. But as the plane continued its flight, Karen couldn't help but wonder how many other assumptions she had made throughout her life. How many people had she judged without ever knowing their stories? How many had she dismissed because they didn't fit into the neat boxes she had created in her mind? And how long would it take her to unlearn those biases, to start seeing people for who they truly were instead of who she assumed they were? That was a question she didn't yet have the answer to, but one she knew she had to find. As the plane soared through the sky, the tension in the cabin felt palpable. Karen's mind raced, the weight of the previous moments pressing down on her chest. She had tried to make things right, but she knew deep down that an apology in private wouldn't be enough. The gravity of her mistake couldn't be erased with just a few words. Minutes later, as the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, Karen's stomach twisted. The announcement was calm, professional, but she couldn't focus on the details. She knew what was coming. She had been told that this wasn't just a personal mistake. It was something the airline would address in front of everyone. There would be no way to hide behind the curtain of a quiet apology. Attention, passengers, the captain's voice said, making everyone's heads turn. We've had a situation on board that requires us to make some important clarifications. Please bear with us as we work to resolve this matter. Karen felt her throat tighten, a wave of heat rushing to her face. She wanted to disappear, to crawl into a hole somewhere and never come out. But she couldn't. Not now. The flight attendants were instructed to gather the passengers' attention, and Karen could see the disapproving glances from the people around her. Her gaze flickered nervously toward Danica, who was sitting in the front row of first class now, her eyes fixed forward. She hadn't said much since Karen had escorted her back to her seat, but Karen knew the soldier's words had landed. They were still echoing in her mind, a reminder of how much damage she had caused with just one ill-considered judgment. Karen stepped forward, swallowing hard. She could feel the eyes of every passenger on her, their silent judgment almost suffocating. She didn't need to see their faces to know they were watching, waiting for her to admit her mistake. Excuse me, Karen began, her voice shaky but loud enough to be heard by everyone. I want to address something that has occurred today. I made a terrible mistake. I judged someone based on their appearance, assuming they did not deserve to be in first class. That person is a soldier, a woman who has served this country. And I wronged her. A murmur rippled through the cabin, the passengers shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Karen could hear a few whispers, but she pushed forward, knowing there was no turning back. I failed to see the truth, Karen continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. I humiliated someone who deserved respect, and I cannot undo that. I was wrong, and I am deeply sorry, not only to her, but to every person I've ever judged unfairly. I promise to learn from this mistake, but for now, I owe this woman and all of you an apology. The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood her ground. She had said what she needed to say, but she knew the consequences were far from over. The flight attendant who had accompanied her stood quietly by her side, nodding toward her as if silently offering support. But Karen didn't need sympathy. She needed accountability. I also want to clarify, Karen said, the weight of her next words heavy in the air, that I will be suspended from my duties while an investigation takes place. The airline will be reviewing this situation to ensure it doesn't happen again, and I will fully cooperate. I deserve to face the consequences of my actions." The air felt thick as Karen finished her statement, and for a moment, she thought the weight of the apology would crush her. But then, slowly, she heard something she hadn't expected. The soft sound of applause started quietly, almost hesitant, but it grew. Passengers exchanged glances, and before Karen could fully comprehend what was happening, the applause grew louder, and the cabin filled with a sense of reluctant appreciation. Karen felt a lump form in her throat, a mixture of guilt and something else she couldn't quite identify. She didn't deserve their applause. Not yet. But the fact that they hadn't descended into anger or contempt, that they hadn't started yelling or demanding more, made the situation feel less like a total loss. She had made the apology, and it was genuine. The rest of the world, it seemed, was ready to move on. Yet the discomfort remained. Karen knew she couldn't escape the consequences of her actions. This was just the beginning. The investigation would scrutinize everything: her history with the airline, any previous mistakes, and the impact this would have on her career. Would she still have a job when all was said and done? Would the public fallout from this error be enough to end her career in aviation? The flight continued, but Karen's mind was far away. She wasn't sure how long it took for the plane to land, but the time seemed to stretch on endlessly. When the seatbelt sign finally went off, and the passengers began gathering their things, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that her life had changed forever. The people around her were polite, some even offering small smiles, but she knew things would never be the same as the last of the passengers disembarked. Karen remained in the galley, her back to the wall. She couldn't bear to face them again. Not yet. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her supervisor. "Karen, I've reviewed the situation. You're suspended pending investigation. HR will be in touch with you soon." Karen closed her eyes, her shoulders slumping. She knew the truth. This wasn't just a simple mistake anymore. This was the beginning of the end. She would have to face whatever consequences came her way, whether it was the end of her career or the beginning of a long road to redemption. But for now, all she could do was wait, and hope that somehow she would find a way to make things right, even if it cost her everything. The days after the flight were a blur of emotions for Danica. The humiliation she had felt on the plane was still fresh in her mind, but something within her had shifted. It wasn't just about her anymore. The incident, though deeply personal, had become a symbol of something far greater, a widespread problem that many had faced, silently suffering from the weight of judgment based on appearance, status, or assumptions. She realized that her own experience, though painful, was just a single thread in a much larger tapestry of inequality. It had taken a moment of anger, frustration, and disbelief to turn into a driving force for change. Danica had been a soldier, a protector of others, but now she found herself in the unique position of having to stand up not just for herself, but for every person who had been overlooked or disrespected because of who they were or how they looked. She had been judged for the simple act of flying in first class. What about those who face discrimination every day in their workplaces, their homes, their communities? The idea came to her slowly, but once it did, it wouldn't leave her. She had to do something, not just to prove a point, but to inspire real change. After all, she wasn't the only one who had been subjected to unfair treatment. How many others had endured similar moments of humiliation, quietly accepting them because speaking out felt impossible? She sat at her desk late one evening, staring at a blank screen. The letter she was about to write wasn't just an apology for herself or a reaction to a single incident. It was a call to action, a plea for fairness, equality, and the rejection of the harmful assumptions that so often clouded people's judgment. With each keystroke, she poured herself into the words, her passion and anger blending into a powerful, heartfelt message. Statement from Danica Hayes. To whom it may concern, it is with a heavy heart that I share the experience I had recently on an airline flight, a situation that brought with it feelings of shame and anger. However, what I've come to realize is that my experience isn't an isolated one. There are countless individuals who face judgment, bias, and exclusion based on their appearance, their background, or their social status. On a recent flight, I was told to leave my first-class seat, not because of anything I had done, but because someone, based solely on their assumptions, decided that I didn't deserve to be there. I am a soldier trained to defend this country, to protect the rights of others. But in that moment, I was treated as if I were less than, as if my service, my sacrifice, and my worth were not enough to earn a place in the section I had rightfully paid for. But this isn't just about one isolated incident. It's about how many people, many of us, face these situations daily. It's about the people whose voices are ignored, whose worth is diminished, who are cast aside because they don't meet some arbitrary standard that society has created. Whether it's the waitress in the restaurant, the janitor in the office building, or the soldier in uniform, they all have a right to dignity, respect, and equality. For far too long, we have allowed assumptions and biases to rule our interactions. We make judgments about others based on what we see, without ever understanding who they truly are or what they've experienced. We have allowed appearances to dictate worth, and it's time to stop that. I stand here not just for myself, but for all those who have been overlooked, belittled, or discriminated against. I call for change, not just within the airline industry, but in every corner of society. We must reject the idea that anyone is less deserving because of their background, their profession, or their appearance. It is time to create a world where respect is earned through actions, not assumptions. We need policies in place that not only condemn discrimination but actively work to prevent it. We need training for all employees, whether in the airline industry, in the workplace, or in any field that emphasizes empathy, understanding, and equality. We need a world where people are valued for who they are, not for how they look or the uniform they wear. I ask that you join me in standing up for fairness. Let us build a society where judgment is reserved for actions, not appearances, and where every person, regardless of their status, is treated with the respect they deserve. Together, we can make a change. Sincerely, Danica Hayes. Danica hit send, a deep breath escaping her lips as she reread the words. It wasn't just a statement, it was a manifesto, and now it was out there for the world to see. The weight of it all didn't fully hit her until she sat back, letting the silence envelop her. It felt like an open door, a threshold she had crossed. She knew the road ahead would be hard. There would be backlash, criticism, even people who would try to silence her. But for the first time in a long time, she felt empowered. She wasn't just reacting to what had happened to her. She was actively shaping the narrative, forcing a conversation that needed to be had. The days that followed were a whirlwind. News outlets picked up the story, and Danica's statement went viral. People reached out to her from all over the world. Messages of support, gratitude, and shared experiences flooded her inbox. She wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for them too. In the midst of all the attention, the airline responded. They issued a public apology, one that came with an acknowledgement of the incident and a commitment to reforming their policies. They promised better training for their employees, along with a complete review of their customer service practices. But Danica knew that words alone weren't enough. This had to be followed by action. But even as the wheels of change began to turn, Danica couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. She had ignited something, a movement, a shift in the way people viewed one another. And it wasn't just about getting an apology or fixing a broken system. It was about setting a new standard. It was about refusing to accept a world where judgments were made based on appearances, and where the value of a person was determined by who they were, not what they wore or how much they earned. And with that, Danica knew her fight had only just begun. She was ready to keep pushing, to keep standing up for herself and for others. Because in the end, true change would only come when people stopped judging and started listening. In the weeks following the incident, the ripple effect of Danica's story spread far beyond the confines of social media or the news outlets that had initially picked it up. What had started as a humiliating moment on a flight had transformed into a powerful movement, a call to action that demanded justice, fairness, and respect for all people, regardless of their background, appearance, or profession. The airline, still reeling from the public backlash, had no choice but to issue a formal apology. The statement was direct, acknowledging the mistake and the harm caused to Danica. It wasn't just a general apology, either. It was a promise to take immediate action. They announced plans to revise their policies, particularly regarding customer service training and the protocols around treating all passengers equally, no matter their social standing. This was a start, but Danica knew, as she sat at her desk reading the airline's statement, that the battle wasn't over. The airline's apology was only the beginning of the transformation. They had promised diversity training for all employees, especially those who interacted directly with customers. This wasn't simply a checkbox on a corporate agenda. It was a deep commitment to change. Their CEO made a public appearance, stating that the company was investing in a complete overhaul of its customer service protocols, with an emphasis on eliminating any form of discrimination, overt or subtle. The idea was to instill empathy in the workforce, to teach them not to make assumptions based on appearance, but to see people as individuals with stories, challenges, and worth. But for Danica, the real work had only just begun. She hadn't fought for an apology or a corporate initiative. She had fought for something much bigger, the opportunity to be seen and heard, to stand up for herself and for others who had been judged unfairly. The overwhelming response to her statement made her realize just how widespread the issue of discrimination was. She wasn't alone. People from all walks of life reached out to her, sharing their stories of being dismissed, devalued, or misunderstood. From employees in corporate settings to mothers working multiple jobs, from students to the elderly, the stories poured in. Each one a testament to the silent battles fought daily, often with no one to hear. Danica's story became a symbol of resilience, of not accepting injustice quietly, of finding the courage to speak out, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. She didn't just spark a conversation. She ignited a movement. People who had once felt powerless now found their voices. They began to speak up against the small injustices in their lives, the ones that often went unnoticed: discrimination in the workplace, mistreatment by service employees, and even the everyday bias in social settings. They, too, demanded fairness. They, too, began to realize that their stories mattered. The media embraced Danica as an emblem of determination and fairness. She became a guest on talk shows, a figurehead for a campaign of equality that resonated deeply across the nation. But it wasn't the fame or the recognition that moved her. What mattered most was the tangible change that started to take place in society, in the companies, and in people's hearts. The visibility of her story helped shine a light on the systemic issues that plagued not only the airline industry but also other sectors. There was no ignoring the need for diversity training, for inclusive policies, and for transparent complaint systems. Companies began to take note. Government officials reached out to Danica, asking for her perspective on how to implement better complaint resolution systems within industries. They discussed the need for standardized protocols for handling discrimination claims, emphasizing the importance of a system that was accessible, transparent, and, most importantly, actionable. Danica's story had not only highlighted an issue within one airline, it had revealed gaps in how society as a whole dealt with injustice and unfair treatment. It wasn't just about being treated with dignity. It was about creating a culture where those who were wronged had a clear path to voice their complaints, and their voices would be heard and acted upon in workplaces across the country. Companies began rolling out mandatory diversity training for their employees. These programs weren't just about fulfilling legal requirements. They were about changing the culture, about creating an environment where biases were challenged and people could feel safe and valued, no matter their position. Danica's words continued to echo in boardrooms, in HR departments, in government offices, and in everyday conversations. They had become the rallying cry for a society that demanded better. But for Danica, the real victory came in the form of the personal messages she received. It was the emails from strangers who told her that her courage had helped them find their own. It was the messages from parents who shared how their children had been inspired by her to stand up for themselves. It was the stories from people who had felt small and invisible, who now believed that their voices mattered. Danica's bravery had sparked something profound, a shift in the way people viewed themselves and their worth. As she sat in her living room, reflecting on everything that had unfolded, Danica realized that what she had done, what she had started, was far bigger than any single incident. It was about more than just righting a wrong that had happened to her on an airplane. It was about creating a world where no one had to endure the pain of judgment based on something so trivial as appearance or assumptions. It was about building a future where fairness wasn't just an ideal, but a reality for everyone. And while the work was far from over, Danica couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. She had taken a stand, and in doing so, she had made a difference. She had become more than just a soldier. She had become a champion for change, a voice for those who had been silenced for far too long. And that, she thought, was the real victory. The aftermath of Danica's courageous stand resonated far beyond her initial confrontation on that flight. In the weeks that followed, her story was shared across news outlets, social media platforms, and even among military communities. What had begun as a personal incident had transformed into a powerful movement for change, and Danica found herself receiving respect and admiration from many, especially veterans who saw her as a true embodiment of the values they held dear: honor, integrity, and the pursuit of justice. Danica, who had always preferred a quiet life away from the spotlight, never sought fame or recognition. In fact, she had only acted in the moment to defend herself and others who had been unfairly judged. But as her story spread, it became clear that she had unintentionally sparked a fire within countless individuals who had long suffered from discrimination. Veterans, in particular, were deeply moved by her bravery. Many reached out to her, acknowledging that they, too, had experienced prejudice and mistreatment during their service, whether due to their race, gender, or background. They saw in her a reflection of their own struggles, and her actions inspired them to speak out. As well as the days turned into weeks, Danica's life began to shift. Her days were still filled with the responsibilities of being a soldier, but there was now an added layer to her identity. She wasn't just a military officer anymore. She had become a symbol of respect and fairness, a living example of what it meant to stand up against injustice. Danica began to receive invitations to speak at various events, from military gatherings to public forums discussing equality and diversity. She never turned down an opportunity to share her message, which was simple yet powerful. Fairness isn't a privilege, it's a right. While Danica was grateful for the recognition, she never let it cloud her sense of purpose. She remained grounded, focused on her mission to advocate for those who had been silenced. Her story was not about seeking accolades. It was about creating a world where discrimination had no place. Each time she spoke out, she shared stories of individuals who had come forward with their own experiences of being dismissed, judged, or overlooked. These stories, in turn, inspired others to do the same, creating a ripple effect that was impossible to ignore. Danica's journey was not easy. There were still moments when she faced resistance, when her efforts were met with skepticism, and when the weight of her new role felt heavy. But each challenge only reinforced her determination. She realized that her fight was bigger than any single battle. This was about transforming the way society viewed fairness and respect. She was not alone in this fight. There were thousands of others who shared her vision for a world where people were judged based on their character, not their appearance or their background. Through her continued advocacy, Danica also became an influential voice in the military. She worked closely with leadership to incorporate fairness and equality into the training programs, ensuring that every soldier, regardless of their identity, had the support they needed to succeed. Her efforts helped spark a broader conversation within the military community about how they could be more inclusive and supportive, especially for those who had historically been marginalized. Her leadership in this area solidified her place not just as a soldier, but as a pioneer for change. Her impact didn't stop with the military. The corporate world also began to take note. Several large companies reached out to her to help them create more inclusive workplace environments. Danica's influence extended far beyond the confines of her uniform, and she was now a respected consultant and speaker, offering insights into how organizations could combat bias and discrimination. Her work with these companies helped them create transparent complaint systems, diversity training programs, and initiatives designed to elevate underrepresented voices. But even with all the success and recognition, Danica never lost sight of the core values that had driven her actions from the start: fairness, respect, and the belief that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. She remained humble, often attributing her success to the support of those who had stood by her. In her eyes, her journey was just beginning. There was so much more to be done, and she was ready to continue the fight for a more just and equal world. As the story of Danica's bravery and determination continued to inspire others, it became clear that her legacy would be one of lasting change. She had proven that a single act of courage could spark a revolution. A revolution that not only challenged the status quo but redefined what it meant to be truly fair and just. She had shown that fairness wasn't just a lofty ideal. It was something that could be fought for, something that could be achieved. Danica's journey is a reminder to all of us that no matter where we are, we have the power to make a difference. It doesn't matter if we're a soldier, a teacher, a parent, or a student. If we stand up for what's right, we can change the world around us. And, perhaps most importantly, we can inspire others to do the same. So, as you finish reading Danica's story, take a moment to reflect. How can you contribute to creating a more fair and just society? What steps can you take to ensure that everyone, regardless of their background or appearance, is treated with respect and dignity? If Danica's story moved you, inspired you, or made you think, be sure to subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories like hers. Join us as we continue to explore the world of changemakers, those who are standing up for what's right and working tirelessly to make the world a better place for all. Your voice matters. Let's raise it together. Subscribe now, and let's keep pushing for a world where fairness and justice prevail.